Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the Women in Medicine Summit, a transformational CME conference happening September 13th to 14th at the Drake Hotel in Chicago. Engage in leadership programming, learn negotiation skills, receive on-site coaching and mentoring, and see who will win this year's I Stand With Her awards. This year, we're excited to offer unique programming that includes a special session on how using improv comedy can bring fun back into medicine. We also have financial sessions tailored to help you navigate the complexities of personal and professional finances. Discover ways to advance into leadership roles, combat burnout, and either reignite your love for your current role or find joy in a new career path. Don't forget our Friday evening gala, a highlight this year you definitely won't want to miss. Register now at womeninmedicinesummit.org and be part of the movement that is shaping the future of healthcare. Join us to network, learn, and celebrate the power of women in medicine.
Welcome to the Revitalizing Doctor podcast. We explore with our guests how you can move from surviving to thriving as a physician. We know that when you connect with your values and authenticity, you can live a life that is fulfilling and not only good for you, but drives the necessary transformation in healthcare to take better care of our physicians, which means better care for our patients. Hi, lovelies. I wanted to record this podcast while this thought is fresh of mind. And I think I'm going to call episodes like this On My Heart. So what's on my heart right now is a lecture that I just heard. And it's very rare for those of us that are especially involved in academics. We hear so many lectures, right? And once you've been doing this for a few years, it's just rare that a lecture actually captivates you, that you listen to something and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is really important information. I am so proud of where I work now. I work at Temecula Valley Hospital, and our residency program is associated with Southwest Healthcare. Shout out to my co-faculty and our wonderful residents. I love you all very much. And I want to talk about a lecture that Dr. Shen Li gave at our recent journal club. And it was about his experience working for Doctors Without Borders. And this lecture that he gave really hit a chord with me, and it was like a chord that needed to be struck, partially because a lot of it resonated with how I felt about my time on deployment. There were just moments of his story that I was like, oh yeah, I remember when something was super hard. I know that feeling, or I know something similar to that. But what I really want to talk to you guys about is a phrase that I've said way too many times. And it's American healthcare is broken, or American healthcare is a dumpster fire. So I want to introduce you to this concept that most of our suffering that we experience is related to our thoughts. And that may sound really crazy, especially if you've never been exposed to this concept before. And no, I'm not saying that if somebody assaults you or, something horrible happens to you, that I'm not trying to gaslight you and say you shouldn't feel sad or angry or hurt or whatever emotion around. I want to focus on this specific example of my thought that the healthcare system is broken or a dumpster fire. We're going to use that as the example throughout this podcast episode. And I think you'll see by the end how you could insert something else. So I have this thought frequently, and it comes out usually when I'm under stress. And if we think about using the correct word for a situation, which fans of the pod know I love Brene Brown, And I love her book, Atlas of the Heart, in which she talks about how important it is. The whole book was written in order to help us properly define various emotions and have the right word. So when I say healthcare is a dumpster fire or healthcare is broken, that thought most often comes into my brain when I'm feeling actually overwhelmed. So not just stressed, overwhelmed. And Brene Brown defines overwhelm as beyond feeling stressed. It's actually when you feel like you need to shut down. And I think many of us in medicine, especially emergency medicine, have had moments where we feel like the walls are caving in or the wheels are falling off the bus, whatever phrase you want to use. And it's very hard to move forward because you're feeling such overwhelm. So during moments like that, I have this repetitive thought of healthcare is broken. And for me, a common trigger for that thought is boarding or crowding in the emergency department. So when there are people everywhere and it's physically hard for me to walk through a hallway, my physical space feels like it's being impacted and it's hard to move, I get this thought. Healthcare is broken. It's a dumpster fire. A system that was properly working wouldn't have people stacking up like this. Boarding is a direct result of a system not working correctly. So that's the thought. And then after a thought comes a feeling. And for me, the system is broken. It's a dumpster fire. Makes me feel deflated and defeated. And that feels like a sinking in my heart. If I think about what does that actually feel like, it feels like the sinking feeling and heaviness in my body. And what action does that trigger? Well, frequently the action is, I feel annoyed. And then the action is often being curt or stewing in that emotion, like kind of shutting down a little bit and maybe talking less or being more curt. So that's the action. And I don't particularly like that. So if we follow this back, the action, the behavior is all linked to this thought. Healthcare is a dumpster fire. It's broken. So what was this lecture that helped me break through this repetitive thought? So Dr. Lee, which I'm really hopeful to have him on the podcast so he can tell us the story in more detail, tells the story about his first and ironically last mission working with Doctors Without Borders. And he was assigned to work in Kenya. And it was a challenging experience, as anybody can probably imagine. But after about 4 months in, things were getting better at his site. And somebody comes up to him and says, Dr. Lee, tomorrow you don't need to come into work. And he laughs because that's like a really funny thing, right? We're used to coming into work every day. Why don't I need to come in? And they explain to him that actually all the doctors are going to go on strike in Kenya because they have not been paid. They're a universal healthcare, government-run healthcare system, and doctors get paid by the government. And the government decided to not pay anybody. And the doctors, in their defense, had shown up for months working without getting paid. And this was all news to him. They weren't complaining. They had never told him that they weren't getting paid until this day. All the hospitals and clinics, everything healthcare associated, closed the following day. And they actually emptied out all of the hospitals and made patients leave. And the following day, when this went into place, if you had a car accident, you went into labor, whatever it was, you were on your own. Dr. Lee actually tried to see patients. He tried to go back to the hospital that he was assigned to and just see patients on his own, do what he could. And doctors showed up and essentially told him that they would beat him up or worse if he kept showing up because he was undermining the strike. So he outlined some pretty horrible things that happened and that he saw. And you listen to it and your heart just instantly aches for any patient, any person that was living in Kenya and had an emergency. You know, we deal with emergencies all the time, you know, everything from mental health to trauma to medical illness. And so without a doubt, and he saw the results, people died. And maybe worse than that, and I think doctors listening to this understand what I mean, worse than dying, they suffered, right? There's a lot of things that can happen to you that are worse than death. And he saw that happen. So the light bulb that went off in my head is that system broke. It actually broke. In my mind, and I would imagine in a lot of people's minds listening, that would actually be the definition of healthcare breaking. If every single place in a country, from clinic to hospital, outpatient surgery to everything, was actually closed. And to paint this picture a little bit more vividly, they closed the mental health hospital and they made those patients leave. And it created such chaos, they had to bring the military in. So, I mean, just horribly atrocious things happened. What this sparked in me is that would be healthcare breaking. What we have in America. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Are you a physician mom with school-aged children feeling utterly exhausted? My friend Dr. Sheeta Shaffi invites you to take a little time this summer to join her in a small, intimate group for meaningful conversations. Dr. Shaffi is an emergency physician, coach, and mom to 8-year-old twins. She understands firsthand what you're going through. This isn't a pizza party or a yoga class. You'll meet for 2 one-hour sessions twice a month starting in July to help you move out of exhaustion, let go of mom guilt, and live a life you're not only proud of, but can truly enjoy. Connect with her on LinkedIn or Instagram at Sheeta Shaffi to learn more. Sheeta is spelled Shideh, and Shaffi is spelled Shafie. You can also check the show notes for a link so you can connect with her there as well. Is not great right now, and a lot of patients suffer. A lot of healthcare workers suffer because of the system that we have created and allowed to persist, but it is not that bad. And so what it did for me is it helped reinforce. I had heard this concept of thoughts drive feelings, which vis-a-vis drive actions. And this is something that's taken from cognitive behavioral therapy and by coaching. And there's a really great podcast called The Life Coach School by Brooke Castillo. And the first few episodes, she really gets into this in a lot of detail and speaks about it more clearly than I am today. And I would encourage you to listen to that. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. But what it helped me realize is when you're having a negative thought or thought, any thought, it works for anything. Ask yourself these questions. Is the thought true? And if you're like me, you're probably going to say, hell yes, it's true. That's why I'm thinking it. I would then ask you to ask yourself again, is it really true? So on the surface, I'll give you the example of doing this. So healthcare is broken. It's a recurring thought that I have. And so my natural tendency is to say yes. I mean, I worked during COVID. Hello, it's broken. Okay. Then if I follow that up with, is it really true? Well, after I listened to this lecture, I no longer think it's true. It's messed up. It's not right, but it's not fully broken. And then that invites some space to remind myself that a system, as friend of the pod, Cherie Johnson would remind us, and I encourage you to listen to the episodes with Cherie, reminds us that the system is made by people and physicians actually have a lot of power in the system. And for a lot of different reasons that we've talked about in other episodes, we sometimes forget or minimize the agency that we actually have, and that a system is made by people. It is allowed to continue as it currently functions by people, and that we, as physicians, can be leaders and create change. So I want to come back to this process. So what's the thought? You ask yourself, is it true? And then if you're like most people, you have to ask yourself again, because our tendency is to say, hell yes, it's true because I'm thinking it and I'm awesome. But then when you go, is it really true? Many times you're like, fuck, it's not actually true. All right. So then that creates some space. The third question you can ask yourself is after, is it true? Is it really true? Is even if it's true, let's take something that is 100% true, but you ask yourself, is this thought helping me? So for instance, I wish I could have used this more during COVID. Many people understand that if you worked in healthcare, especially before we were vaccinated, you would interact with people that had made a choice. For me, the hardest time during COVID was right before healthcare workers got vaccinated. So I got my vaccine in December of 2020, and Thanksgiving, the period after that, was very hard because a lot of people made choices to get together with their family and friends. And then they came into the emergency departments a few weeks later, exposing me to COVID. And it was 100% true that they had made a choice to gather and got sick. And now were exposing me, which I felt that it would be really crappy to contract COVID right before the vaccine came out. I had a lot of anxiety about, oh my gosh, I'm so close. I'm so close. Please, please, please don't let me get it right before the vaccine comes out. And at this point, we still didn't understand much about the virus. And quite frankly, I had taken care of a lot of people that had died or had horrible outcomes associated with COVID. So I was very scared of it. So the thought was true that people had made choices that were now exposing me to a virus that we didn't have very much information about. And it was scaring me. While I don't believe in toxic positivity, and I don't think you should stuff or bottle your thoughts, there's this phrase that comes from Stoicism, and I'm blanking on who quotes it, but we've talked about it on the Emergency Mind, and friend of the pod, Christina Shenvy, who's going to be on the pod later, has introduced this concept of you can have a thought, but you don't have to add fuel to the fire. And many times during COVID, I would have a thought that like, this is super, super shitty and hard. And instead of just going like, this person made a choice and I'm upset right now about that, I would just like add all the gasoline to that thought, which generated a lot of anger. And then anger is a really tricky emotion because it feels active. It feels like you're doing something, but you're not. You're actually not doing anything. I mean, you're kind of messing yourself up, but it's not really doing anything. Sometimes it can drive positive behavior. I'll give you that it, is often a key ingredient to driving change and a lot of important social movements. So the other thing I'll leave you with is what I finally got to very late in COVID. There were things that were happening that required what I like to call radical acceptance. I needed to radically accept the reality of what was happening. And I talk to my residents about this a lot in emergency medicine, that something can be happening. Your patient starts decompensating. And frequently in emergency medicine, we don't know immediately why the person's decompensating. And the cases I've always found the hardest is when somebody comes in talking or with a minor complaint and you haven't anticipated them decompensating. And so my advice to my residents when this happened is you need to move through the stages of grief very quickly and get to acceptance. It's kind of my joke phrase, but I'm very serious about it. That in order to move forward, you have to radically accept the reality. And you can't get mired down in the why. Why is this person decompensating? There might be a time to get to that. There frequently is. But, when someone has an impending airway or, they need access, whatever it is, you need to radically accept that, holy crap, this sucks and it's scary and I must move forward. And I think that's true with scary emotions as well. Like, holy crap, this is hard and I'm disappointed, I'm scared, I'm angry. I'm going to radically accept that that's how I feel about this. And I'm going to connect to my values, to link to Emotional Agility by Susan David. I'm going to connect to the value that I need right now that's going to help me to show up and choose an action in line with my values. So the next time you have a thought, I encourage you to ask yourself, is that thought true? Is it really true? If it's really true, how is this thought serving me? Is there a way that I can honor this thought? Like, hello, friend. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate that opinion that you're sharing with me. And we're going to leave it right there for now. And I'll come back to you later. But I need to do something else right now. I at least need to not pour fuel on it. And the other thing that's been really helpful for me, again, with this healthcare is broken dumpster fire situation, is when we're working a shift and we're seeing patients, especially in the emergency department, you're just trying to make it through, right? You got a lot of stuff to do, a lot of people asking things of you, and you really need to stay tactical. You think of like, am I using my strategic brain and thinking on a large scale, or am I thinking more like, what do I need to do for this patient? For the most part, when you're on shift, and I would imagine this works if you're rounding on patients on the ward or in clinic, is you can have like brief thoughts of like, ooh, I think this system could work a little bit better if we did this, but you can't get mired in that. And I think that's really something that I've noticed for myself when I'm having these frustrating moments on shift is, am I thinking about the system solution for this and frustrated that we haven't figured this out? That's frequently what I do. I get caught up in thinking about the bigger picture where I really need to be focused on the more immediate issues going on. So there's a time and a place to think, this doesn't sound exactly right, to think small, but I prefer the terminology of thinking tactically versus thinking big, thinking strategically. So I'm really going to start trying to do that more. Is when I get caught up in my head of like, this whole issue with boarding is so dysfunctional and such a example of a broken healthcare system. If I have a great idea on how that might be fixed, maybe I'll pause and write it down. But more often than not, I'm going to say, this isn't the time for that. Right now, what can I do to make some tactical decisions that will improve things for this individual patient or this group of patients that are currently in our emergency department? And there was a recent episode on Glennon Doyle's podcast, We Can Do Hard Things. And the expert that was on there said that she actually names different, this is going to sound really weird, especially to a group of physicians, but I'm going to go there, that she names these different voices in her head, actual names. So I'll give you an example. When I get that I want to think big ideas, I want to drive meaningful change in healthcare, that strategic part of my brain that is so awesome, it's great, I'm going to call that voice Linda, my co-founder of the podcast and Revitalize, Linda. because Linda has worked as a chief medical officer. She's worked as a vice president of a healthcare system. So like she understands all these system things. And Linda and I love to talk about system-wide changes in healthcare. So the next time I get that thought when I'm on shift, I'm going to go, "Hi, Linda. Thank you so much for sharing your opinion. That's a great idea. And I'd love to talk to you more about that, but I can't talk to you right now." Likewise, when I need to stay more tactical and just see a bunch of patients and move through that, I'm going to channel Patty. Why did I name her Patty? I have this friend. Some of you know him, Patrick. He's an emergency physician that practices up in Idaho. And Patrick is really good at seeing a lot of patients. And he's also really good at not getting distracted by the large problems in medicine. Like if we're having a beer, we can talk about that and we'll rail against the system and all the things that should change. But when Patrick shows up to work, he shows up to see a lot of patients and he just moves through the meat. I'm sure a lot of you know people like that. Maybe you are those people. And hats off to the people that can just churn and burn. I sometimes, as we're discovering, get caught up in my own head. So when I need to be more like Patrick, I'm going to say, "Patty, hey, Patty, I need you right now. I need you to just churn and burn. This is a situation in which Patty will thrive." So I know it sounds a little hokey pokey, a little weird, especially to physicians, but there are many different facets of ourselves. And all of those various parts of ourselves can be extremely helpful, but they aren't always helpful at the exact same time. So one of the other key parts that I want you to take away is when you have these thoughts that come from the different parts of your personality, you can acknowledge that person and say, "Thank you. That is a really interesting point, but it's not helpful right now." And the way they mentioned this on Glennon Doyle's podcast is imagine a person you think is super wise. And on their podcast, they chose Oprah, which perfect person to choose, right? She's so calm and thoughtful and just, when you think of wisdom, maybe that's a family member in your life. Maybe it's a religious person, but channel somebody that you're like, "Oh, wow, that person is just somebody that I would go to for advice." And I instantly feel a sense of calm around them. So pick that person. They're your CEO of your brain, and they are actually in charge of any disagreements that come up with these other parts of your personality. And so when you feel, all right, Linda's starting to act up again. Nope, Patty's being a little bit she stayed too long. Oprah, or whoever that version is for you, walks in and says, "Thank you. You've all been so helpful, but this is the path forward and this is what we're going to do because this is the action that is most in line with my values and will be most efficacious right now. These other ideas that you have, we will table and we may come back to them." And I have found walking through that mental map in my mind has been incredibly helpful. And I think this is most helpful for the people that have a very active mind. They talked about on one of these podcasts that some people don't have this internal monologue. Whew, that must be nice. But for a lot of us, we have a very intensive, active internal monologue. And I find this tool of assigning the various parts voices and then having that calm, collected CEO that can say, "Thank you. This is what we're going to do to move forward." So that's what's been on my heart in my mind today. Thanks for listening to the Revitalizing Doctor podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Revitalize Women Physician Circle, founded by Dr. Linda Lawrence and Dr. Andrea Austin, your host. You can connect with us on our website at www.peoplealwayshcc.com/revitalize. You can tweet at us at Revitalize Women, and please connect with us on LinkedIn at Revitalize Women Physician Circle. We look forward to helping you go from surviving to thriving. This podcast represents our opinions and the opinions of our guests. It does not represent any entity that we work for or with, including the military, the government, or any other institution. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
Hi, it's Dr. Risa E. Lewis, dropping in to tell you about a book that Dr. Adara Landry and I wrote. It's called Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact. It's a business self-help book coming in 2024 by HarperCollins. Pre-order now, Microskills, Small Actions, Big Impact, wherever you buy your books.